So it's very difficult to be there. It is very hard to get there. Even for tourists today, the best way to get there is to fly in there, because Cusco is located in the Andes Mountains, and outside of the Himalayas, they are the second tallest mountain chain in the world, and they're extremely rugged and very difficult to maneuver through. So that was another problem for Pizarro. If you're going to conquer a group of people, the heart of the Incan Empire was very hard to get to, and it was very high in elevation. And if you're going to create a new government, this was the worst place possible to create a capital city. So as he was looking for a new place, he came across the area where Lima is located. Of course, there were other people who lived there. The civilization of Lima predates not only the Spaniards, but also even the Inca Empire. We have found traces of human habitation in the area that go back 10 to 12,000 years. So it was an area where people lived, but it was not until Pizarro claiming this area as its capital that it became a dominant city that it is today. So, like going back to Mexico City, if you go downtown to the heart, to the Plaza Mayor, the major plaza in Mexico City, one is the largest plaza in the world. But when you go to the plaza, you're in also not just the heart of the ancient Aztec capital, you're in the heart of the heart. That was the main square surrounded by the pyramids where all the Aztecs came together and the people came to provide tribute. So the double symbolism with Cortez conquering Tenochtitlan, building his capital on top of it, but if you go down to that area, that is also where the major Catholic cathedral is located. It is the heart of the government, which is so typical of Spanish, when the Spanish laid out their towns. The main square was where they built the biggest cathedral, and it was always the center of their government, as well as market and trade. And again, in Lima, because there was no major Incan city there, when you go to visit it, you're not going to find any major Incan ruins that the city is built on top of. So Pizarro got to start from scratch, and he laid out probably one of the purest forms of a Spanish city in the New World. This area where I'm standing, I'm in the square, and of course beautiful fountains, very typical of the Spanish architecture brought to the New World. Of course the Spanish borrowed this from the Moors, or the Muslims, who conquered their area and were finally dispelled in 1492. So you have the influence of the Moorish with the fountains, beautiful Spanish colonial architecture, and then this is one of the major cathedrals that is located right there on the square. You turn and face literally the other direction, and then there you have the presidential palace. Beautiful, beautiful palace, beautiful gates, very reminiscent to me to Buckingham Palace in London. But still typical with that Spanish architecture. And it's kind of hard to see with the lights on, but you have the Peruvian flag at the top. You can't see it because this bench is in the way. I was there during the World Cup, but you have the stairs that lead into the palace, and you have the big red carpet that is there to greet dignitaries. And as I was told, when the president is in the palace, the carpet is out and the flag is flowing, which is kind of like they do in Buckingham Palace. So again, a little bit of that European influence. And as I said, we were there during the World Cup, and I guess you can't talk about Latin American culture without talking about the real football. Not American football, but football, as we call it, soccer here. And it's always fun to travel through Latin America during the World Cup. I know the World Cup is very dynamic in the U.S. It's growing in popularity, but the entire community shuts down when the games are going, especially when your country is playing. Nothing moves, which is always a lot of fun. So you can plan your tourist activities around that because you have the whole city to yourself if you are a tourist. But when you're there, of course, there were banners everywhere to celebrate the World Cup, of course. A little bit of Americanization in Coca-Cola, being the sponsor. Moving out of the country to Puerto Maldonado. Puerto Maldonado is located in the southern portion of Peru, very near where Bolivia and Brazil and Peru come together. It is located in, of course, the Amazon basin. And this is the town we went to. Puerto Maldonado is an up-and-coming town in Peru. Population about 100,000 people. It is growing, and it has grown. What some of the data that I was looking at, just about 10 years ago, the population was only about 20 to 30,000 people. So can you imagine, within the last 10 to 15 years, they have tripled in size. And when you have that kind of growth, you always, of course, have to ask the question, why, how? Again, imagine Seguin, Texas, right now, 30,000 people. You come back 10 years from now, there's 100,000 people here. You know, it would get our attention. Of course, this is very typical of a lot of Latin American countries. As their governments are becoming stable, as their economies are growing, cities are beginning to grow. But Puerto Maldonado is unique in that there is a highway, a major highway that connects the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean. And this highway goes straight through Puerto Maldonado. So it's a major transportation route across a continent. It is a city also located next to two other countries, with Brazil being a fast developing country. We talk about India and China being economic powerhouses. Get ready for Brazil. Their economy is growing very rapidly. So the close proximity to Brazil is very important for Puerto Maldonado. It is also the base to a lot of mining activity. Of course, the Inca Empire, you can't think about the Incas without thinking about gold. The Incas did mine a lot of the gold. The Spanish came in and mined a lot of the gold, but there's still a lot of gold left there. So gold and other precious minerals are mined in this area, which have provided jobs. So Puerto Maldonado is beginning to grow through the mining industry, but also with a brand new tourist industry. And of course, I was able to participate in this. Since the government has become stable, and as more people want to partake in what is called ecotourism, this place has captured that, and it's very encouraging as to what they are doing. So we arrived in Puerto Maldonado, which I don't have any pictures of, but we went straight to it. It's not just a transportation route for a highway, it is also a major destination to board a boat and travel along the Rio Madre de Dios, is the name of this particular river. The Rio Madre de Dios. The Rio Madre de Dios is a tributary that eventually feeds into the great Amazon River. As you can see here, it is a very large river, and it is a major transportation route, as you can see with all the boats that are located here. You know, it's very difficult to travel through the Amazon in a car. The best way and the fastest way is to go by boat, by water. And people come to Puerto Maldonado on the highway, then they get on their boats, and then they go to many other different points to get to where they need to be. So they have the one highway, and that's pretty much it. To kind of give you an idea, we were staying at the Sandoval Lodge, and we flew to Puerto Maldonado, took a bus to this drop-off point. We got on our boat. We traveled an hour and a half upstream to get to our next drop-off point. Then we got out of our boat, and we had to hike through the jungle for 2 hours. Then from there, we got onto the lake, and we had another 1 hour boat ride to get to our lodge. Fantastic, try it. You know, and of course, that's what ecotourism is. It's not about getting on the interstate highway and stopping off at the Holiday Inn and all that kind of stuff. But it's well worth the effort to get there. So we're beginning our journey, and since we had an hour and a half by boat, or a couple of hours, to get to before we had to hike, they fed us. And in this slide here, of course, very typical tropical dishes, rice, some of the vegetables that you find in the area. Well, you have peas there, but some indigenous native vegetables served in a banana leaf instead of having a plate. Our banana leaf was our plate. Very little meat because not much access to beef and pork in that area. So a very typical dish of the tropics, and rice being a major staple of the diet that is there. And of course, we were also given plantains. But here it is. I am going to, if I may, Terry, turn the lights off just so they can see how beautiful this place is. Isn't that fabulous? It's worth the effort to get there. Lake Sandoval, I'm going to turn your attention over here, get back to a little geography lesson, physical geography. Lake Sandoval is what is called an Oxbow Lake. Again, the Rio Madre de Dios is a very, very large river, but you're in the tropics. In the tropics, it rains pretty much every day. It is an area that gets anywhere from, or in the tropics, you can get anywhere from 200 to 400 inches of rain in a year. That's a lot of water. Again, to put it into context, we get about 36 inches of rain a year, except when we get things like Tropical Storm Hermine coming through. But even then, we had, 6 inches of rain in a 2-day period, and that is normal down there. So with a lot of water, as well as the Andes Mountains having a lot of snow, you have the runoff from the snow melt, as well as a lot of water coming down, which means the rivers, depending on the time of the year, has very large volumes of water coming through. So here you have a typical river as you would find, and rivers bend. You know, water doesn't run in a straight line, or it runs, but it moves and it carves out a curved landscape. So you can have a river that winds, but during certain periods of the year, the rainfall increases, or as the snow melt combines with the rainfall, you will have higher volumes of water than normal. And as this water goes through, and it's easy for us to understand this in central Texas, because let's think back to the floods we've had. Every time after a major flood event, the Guadalupe River has changed its course. Well, imagine in an area where what happens, what we get maybe once a year, once every 3 years, or once every 10 years, it happens all the time. So rivers change their courses, and as they change courses, they carve out new directions, and they can cut off old sections of the river. So you have a river that moves through, but say the river changes direction. You know, you have the original path that is here, recreated over here, but through the next major volume of water coming down, if the river cuts a new course, part of the old river gets cut off. And as it gets cut off, you may have water that flows, but eventually silt and soil builds up, cuts off, and then this fills in with land. But you have a section of water that remains behind, so what has been created is a lake. These are called Oxbow Lakes. We have them in the United States. When you fly over the Mississippi River, you see them everywhere. But you also find this a lot in the tropics. And Lake Sandoval is not only an oxbow lake, it's one of the largest, and it is a unique place.